We're going to cover how to study effectively with the least effort possible. Because the truth is, being a good student isn't all about smarts. Some of it is grit and technique. So, a willingness to work hard, but also a willingness to adopt a good study strategy will make the difference between being a good student versus an excellent student. So, let's get started. Now, before you sit down to really learn material, it's important to optimize your work environment. So that means as few distractions as possible. So remember in our course, we talked about multitasking being a myth. We don't have this wide mental pathway that we could, or wide mental pipeline where we can do several things at once. Our brain isn't created that way. Instead, we can only do one thing at a time, and we tend to toggle back and forth between tasks. So if you stop reading and you check a notification on your phone, the amount of effort and time it takes to disengage from one task to go into the other burns a lot of oxygenated glucose, which is your brain fuel. It also takes more time, and you end up with worse performance. And the weirdest thing of all is you don't even notice that it's cost you so much. So the best thing to do is when you sit down and create your work environment, try to turn off as many distractions as possible. Multitasking is a myth, and you need to focus very specifically on what it is you need to learn. Not only does your work environment need to be in great shape, but so do you. So that means you have to practice good self-care and have a receptive brain ready to learn. So you have to be rested and fed and exercised so you're in good shape to really pay attention. You also have to have a positive frame of mind and a can-do attitude. If you sit down dreading it, hating it, then you're going to find every excuse to do something different. And then you're going to be self-interrupting. Instead, you want to sit down and really give yourself something to look forward to. So if you're sitting down to study, and for most of us, that's not very fun. What I used to do is kind of focus on how great it was going to feel when it was all done, and I could sit down and relax. So I kind of worked on a work before play way of doing things. Now, if you sit down and focus on everything on your inbox, you're going to feel kind of overwhelmed. Instead, just focus on a chunk of the material at a time instead of the whole thing. So like if you're doing, 20 math problems, for example, just sit down and say, I'm going to do these 5, and then take a break. And keep going chunk by chunk until everything gets done, rather than feeling overwhelmed and tanking your attitude. Now, cognitive science tells us that the way to retrieve information is to build several pathways to that information. And the better variety of formats for those pathways, the better you'll be able to retrieve that content at test time. So in order to encode memory better, you don't want to waste any opportunity to engage with the material from the first exposures to the last. And like I said, try a variety of formats. So in a traditional teaching model, that means that teachers assign tasks by reading the text first, maybe lecturing on that same material, asking the students to take notes, encouraging the students to participate in a discussion so that they can elaborate on that material. So as you can see, all those different pathways will lead you to that information, and it also helps with rehearsal. So you want to really try to engage in the material with as much emotional meaning as possible. So elaborating on those concepts, either by, you can watch videos or work in study groups or read it, hear it, feel it, listen, all those different formats are going to help you. So the way to create lots and lots of pathways is create really good notes that are comprehensive. And the way to do that is use abbreviations so you get everything down that the teacher says. Then retype the notes when you get home. I know that sounds like a lot of time spent, but it's far more efficient when you're trying to memorize information when you go through 5 retyped notes that are in really great shape than 20 pages of scribbles in your notebooks. So retype your notes with only the essential information and leave out the illustrative examples, because you only need those at the beginning when you're trying to figure out what that information is. And then highlight those notes. You can also ask the teacher if you can record the lecture, For some people, they remember better what they've heard than what they see. For most of us, we do both. So, auditory pathways are also effective, like visual pathways. In order to help with your reading, if you kind of drifted in and out of attention, which is typical, remember I talked about when your attention drifts, when I wrote about this in the course, that you want to return it like a baby bunny to its box. Rather than getting angry with yourself for getting distracted, just recognize that's part of the process and gently bring yourself back to task. And that happens when people are reading, so it might be useful for you to also outline or highlight your chapters. Also, try to study in different non-distracting locations. So this is what was very effective for me. When I'd sit down to a test item, sometimes I'd remember exactly where I was when I memorized that content more than I did the content. And then I could kind of retrace that pathway. So if I was like, in my dorm room, I'd be like, okay, I know exactly when I learned that. And I'd kind of retrace it back that way. So hopefully, with different non-distracting locations, you can create more pathways. Also, create study groups. The more emotional attachment you have to the material, the easier it is to encode. So by having, good discussions with people that are excited about the content can help you elaborate and give you more pathways that work. Set realistic study goals. So that means that, again, don't cram everything at once. Study small chunks over several days. And a real great trick for experts is after a day's work, review the notes one last time at night right before you go to sleep. It turns out that we process in our sleep. Also, you want to manage your time effectively and use organization tools like tech tools and organization tools that I give you some recommendations in our course. Cognitive science tells us that the longest we can really engage with quality is 20 minutes at a time, and then we need a 5-minute break. So they took all different study types and they compared the different subject groups, and they found that those who focused for 20 minutes at a time with a 5-minute break had better performance and more energy at the end. So rather than sit down and force yourself to 60 minutes of straight study, just do 20 minutes at a time and then a quick 5-minute break. Now that doesn't mean go watch videos or play video games in that 5 minutes, because that's a time suck and it'll take your attention away from the task, and you won't be taking a break for only 5 minutes. Instead, get up, do some push-ups or stretches, get a drink of water, something like that, just to give your brain a break for a minute and then go right back to task. It's also important to rehearse in the same format that you'll be tested in. So if we're talking about the basic 3 formats of testing, multiple choice, open note, or essay, here are some tips. When you go into multiple choice, you're going to have to memorize for recognition. So in order to do that, you're going to have to reverse and quiz yourself over and over in a kill and drill kind of format. You can also use mnemonics, which are little tricks, for example, never eat shredded wheat. That's one I never forgot for learning northeast, southwest. Mnemonics are little tricks where you don't have to memorize all the content, but maybe just a part of it so that you can map it easier. And then visual mind maps are something that is really helpful for complex learning strategies. There's a little book out called Memory Palace. It's available on Amazon that teaches you how to memorize all of Shakespeare's plays forwards and backwards, and it's amazing. And it has you walk through like a castle and see all of these different objects, because sometimes you can create that visual pathway again in order to memorize that material. So that may be helpful for you, is create that visual mapping. Also, creating open notes. Okay, so if you have open note tests, it's important to organize your materials for an efficient search and grab. That means rewriting notes, highlighting, and color tabs rather than kill and drill. Now, of course, usually teachers don't offer you enough time to look up every single item. So you're going to have to do some rehearsal. But on the items that you're having a hard time encoding and memorizing, just make sure that that is at your fingertips very quickly. And finally, in essay tests, you're going to have to do the hard thing and outline and write your practice essays. So the difference between when I switched from a good learner to an excellent learner is when I took the time to organize my material. And that means organizing at test time too. So if I have an essay coming up, that means that I need to sit down and write down what each paragraph is going to talk about. Because remember, every paragraph has a main idea and several supporting details underneath it. So if you take just a couple seconds to organize, then you'll avoid a tangential and wandering essay that you're going to get a poor grade on. Organization is key for essays. And then this is perhaps the most important step of all to being a really excellent, efficient learner with the least amount of effort possible. I can tell you all these different strategies, but the truth is our brains are really different and they may work differently. So I'm going to have the tools that work best for me, the tools and techniques, and you're going to have the tools and techniques that work the best for you. But in order to figure that out, you're going to have to try them all out. So try out all these different techniques and then test the outcome, and then go back and tweak the process and make those necessary adjustments. So at the end of the day, you have the perfect technique toolkit that works for your brain and the kind of material that you're tested on. And there you have it, your goal. So at test day, if you have your perfect strategy toolkit, you're going to be able to engage with the material with the least amount of time and the most efficiency and the best success. So good luck with your learning, and hopefully if you can streamline this technique, then learning can be fun instead of punishing. And at the end of the day, that's really the goal, right? Is to make you a very motivated and happy life learner. All right, take care and thanks for listening. This is Dr. Tracy Bennett with Get Kids Internet Safe.